So a full lunation like the States is never going to be able to hide. Its contradictions are going to be lived out in full view for the entire world to see. We're going to encounter real concepts of death, destruction, release, isolation. It can feel like, look like insanity because I don't really know who I am and what I'm doing yet. This is not a version that it's ever been before. It's not something I've ever seen.
The United States is in a period of rebirth. It's in the process of becoming something new, even if Americans vehemently disagree on what it should look like. The thing is that there are seasons to life, and one of the great gifts of astrology is its ability to tell us which season we're in at a given moment. And what applies for individuals also applies to countries. Now, there's a powerful astrological technique that's very useful for telling us what season of life we're in. It's the Secondary Progressed Lunation Cycle. And it's pointing to this period right now as a new beginning for the US. In this video, I'm joined by astrologer Stormy Grace, who is an expert on this technique. And together, we're going to explore what it can tell us about the fundamental nature of the United States and where it is in its history right now. This is World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waite, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. The two luminaries, the sun and moon, are hugely important in a natal chart. They show us where the light was shining at a particular moment in time. And astrology is really a science of light. What's not always understood is how much information you can get by simply considering the relationship between the sun and moon in a chart. In other words, which phase of its cycle the moon was in when you were born.
At the heart of it, the lunation cycle is just the dance of the shape of light and the interplay between the sun and the moon, the luminaries. We're just seeing what those two lights symbolize in terms of a level of consciousness or instinct or response that's going on in the sky. So it's really the lunation cycle is just the many different conversations that the sun and the moon are having at different times.
Most astrologers divide the moon cycle into 8 phases. The phase the moon is in your chart will tell you something important about the shape of your life and about questions of calling and purpose.
The way that I explain it is the shape of light. You know, when we hear people say like namaste, the light in me sees and honors the light in you. And so when I look at the way the sun and the moon are interacting in a natal chart, it is showing me how much light of consciousness and which lessons at that level of light of consciousness are being shown to us. In the 8 primary lunation phases that I work with, we start at the new moon. The sky is dark and we're 0 to 45 degrees with the sun and the moon being apart from each other. And this in the new moon time is the time where something is new. It's beginning. The sky is dark. You can't really grasp it. I really think of this a lot of times as if you were to put 2 planets together. I know we're talking about the sun and the moon, but it's like the moon and Neptune travel together because you can feel it and sense it, but you can't get your hands on it. It's almost like trying to grasp fog at this time. But this is where something new is being born, even if you can't see what it is just yet. And then we move to the crescent time where we're going from 46 to 90 degrees. And this is where something is struggling to emerge. What was born is now trying to be seen, to have the courage to move forward. But it requires a breaking away from the past in some way. And so that struggle to live, to move forward, really tells us a lot about that crescent phase. Then the first quarter phase, we get about 90 degrees, 135. It's stuck in here. But in the first quarter phase, I think of this a lot as being like the energy of Mars because it's crisis in action. What do? I need to do. But I like to remind people in the first quarter time, you're a builder. What you're doing is something that you called in or something that was a part of a new moon energy is now looking to be put into action. You have to build it. And also things are going away quite quickly in your life. It's a very decisive, quick moving kind of energy. In our gibbous phase, we're going 135 to about 180. And this is, I love gibbous people because I call them the why babies, because under this phase, it's just all about questions and refinement. It's like, why, what, how do I do that? I want this to be better. How do I be better? Right? There's a lot of refinement that's going on in the gibbous phase because it's preparing for this illumination. I'm going to take this thing I built. I've crafted it and fixed it, made it all perfect now, and now I want to shine it out to the world. In the full moon time, 180-225, this is revelation. The full moon is always going to ask us to end something, acknowledge something, make an adjustment, and also create an integration. So this is a high awareness because all of the light in the sky is on now. So whatever needs to be culminated, we'll see this under that full moon energy. The disseminating time, 225-270, is where we're sharing information. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is a time or a person who is disseminating. We're sharing, we're teaching, we're expressing everything that has been gathered when we gathered our harvest. Now we're pouring it out. In our last quarter time, some people call it third quarter time, 270-315, this is crisis of consciousness, just the opposite of the first quarter time. So now instead of what do I do, it's like, what am I? Right? And if you've ever been in your midlife transits, you might know a little bit about this as well. But it's like, what am I? What do I do? Who am I? How does this fit into the story anymore? And it's a really beginning of a conscious letting go of all sorts of things, right? In the progressed time, we call this the winter time. And our final is the balsamic time, 315-360, which brings us all the way back around. And the balsamic is slower, it's rest, it's closure, it's surrender, it's preparing for a new cycle. There's a lot more heavy energy that tends to go with people who are in balsamic energies, but they're the carriers of essential truths. All balsamic phases come with the heaviness that lets us see the world and ourselves in a really different light.
Now, this works just as well for countries as it does for individuals. In this video, we're going to apply this technique to the United States. We're going to look at the popular Sibley chart of the US, timed for 5:10 p.m. on July the 4th, 1776 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, you can see in this chart that the sun was in Cancer at the time of the US's birth, while the moon was in Aquarius. What we're going to focus on here is how the moon was in its full moon phase at the time, because it was between 180 and 225 degrees ahead of the sun.
So being under a full moon energy, first of all, it was coming into the world stage at this particular time, needing to be very visible, needing to be very expressive, highly polarized, because this is what we have when we've got a full moon, right? The sun and the moon are pulling against each other. The tension of opposites becomes this really challenging, of course, but really creative heartbeat that will shape the whole rest of the destiny of this particular country, right? So as we see it, we also know that it was important at this time, as the U.S. Sibley chart came to be, to have an awakening and a reckoning. That's the energy of this. It was a time, as this was coming to be, that this public confrontation of how we're going to show up, public confrontation of what's shadow, what's light, what's right for us, what's not. This is going to be in the signature of the United States, repeated cultural, national awakenings and reawakenings. So a full moon nation like the States is never going to be able to hide. Its contradictions are going to be lived out in full view for the entire world to see.
What I find interesting is how the theme of isolationism comes up repeatedly in US history. The US is, needless to say, a really important player in geopolitics, but there are often periods where the US pulls back from world affairs, or people at least argue that it should, but it always gets dragged back into them. The fact that the US has a full moon in its chart suggests that, for better or worse, the US will always be involving itself in the world's affairs, and perhaps that it only truly finds itself through its relations with other countries.
Just looking at the fact that it's a full moon chart, that pullback business is not it. It's not it. A full moon chart will require the unfolding evolution in visibility. All of the lights are on here.
The US will always have that full moon signature baked into its chart and essence, but just like an individual, a country also goes through cycles. And the US has reached an important phase in its progressed lunation cycle right now. If you're getting something out of this video so far, please do me a favor and click the like button down there. And do subscribe and enable notifications and all that jazz if you want to make sure to catch more from this channel. And one quick announcement on this month's long-form live stream. It will take place on Friday, December the 19th at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Pacific. In this stream, I'll be showing how Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto work together. In particular, we're going to see how their successive transits through the signs build on each other's work. And I think this one may help us to better understand where transits like Neptune in Aries and Pluto in Aquarius are going to take us. I have some mind-blowing research lined up for you in this one, so don't miss it. You can purchase entry on the live streams page of worldastrologyreport.com. But entry is free for members on my website, so sign up there to join the stream or to watch the recording later. All right, thanks for listening. Let's get back into it. The technique of secondary progressions is a symbolic technique. Essentially, what we do is we look at the movement of the planets each day following the birth of a person or entity. And we say that 1 day of planetary movement symbolizes 1 year of life. 2 days equals 2 years of life. 3 days equals 3 years, and so on. And so for any given entity at any given moment, you can generate a progressed chart.
So when we have our natal chart, this is it. This is kind of the stamp that the planets where they were there when the time we were born. It's our beautiful snapshot. But the planets move on, things move on, we move on. So through secondary progressions, we're able to take the daily motion of the planets after we were born and translate those into years of life. So essentially, we can use a secondary progression to see an entire lifespan of how things are going to be unfolding or where the planets will be at, right? So it's more of the symbolic unfolding, which allows us to see that evolution in the chart over time, right? Countries and nations are no different because these progressions correspond to collective moods, policy shifts, revolutions, rebirths, new identities that come up as well.
You can progress all the planets, but we're going to focus here on the sun and moon. The moon has a 29.5-day cycle, which means that through some mysterious process of symbolic resonance, we experience 29.5-year cycles in life. This is also roughly the length of the Saturn cycle, which is surely no coincidence. Again, that seems to speak to the importance of these almost 30-year cycles in our lives. What we're going to do now is look at the current secondary progressed lunation cycle of the US. We can see that the progressed sun is at 21 Pisces and the progressed moon is at about 25 degrees ahead of it in Aries. And so, since this is between 0 and 45 degrees ahead of the sun, we can say that the moon is in its new moon phase.
Noticing first that it is a progressed new moon time, that's a lot to unpack just in general. But the one thing we want to know is if we're looking at the new moon time, that we've come out of the balsamic. So we have to acknowledge the story that came before as well, because it will shape the new moon time. And what happens at the end of the balsamic time, and we've cleared this really fertile soil, but it has likely been built with death, grief, big transformation. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of labor that has gone into the balsamic time. But then what it brings into the new moon time that we can know right off the bat is that it's given birth to two things. One is a new identity. A new identity came through that birth and that labor. And the thing that new identity will work on for, at a minimum, the next 15 years, but certainly the next 30 or more.
The nature of a new moon is that there's a sense of rebirth, of seeding, of something new coming into the life. But at the time, we generally don't know what that new thing we're going to be developing will look like.
So if we're talking about a person, we speak this out loud. When we're in a progressive new time, you're like, I don't know. I mean, like, I feel like something's happened and I know something's happened, but I don't know what it is yet. And you are going to know immediately that what has to happen in the new moon time to get the next thing to unfold is like Indiana Jones. Last Crusade, when he's like at the place where he's going to find the chalice, right? And he sees this bridge. And there's these two caverns he's got to get to, but there's no bridge. He's like, how am I going to do this? That moment right there where he's standing there before the idea has presented itself, that feeling is new moon. That's the new moon energy. I know there's a way over there. I just don't see it. And I have no idea how the hell I'm going to make that happen. And then he throws some sand and the bridge begins to appear. That's a new moon energy. right? You gotta take the intuitive step and then the rest of the bridge appears.
Remember, a new moon is invisible. So there's a sense of groping around in the dark at these times, a sense that we don't know what's being born. We just know that something new has arrived.
There is a new identity that this country has given birth to, right? In the last couple of years, it has given birth to a brand new identity. This is not a version that it's ever been before. It's not something I've ever seen. Now, it doesn't mean that this country is clear on what that next identity is yet either. That includes the government, the people. No one is quite clear on what the next version is that's living here. But so we know that that is something that is happening. We're going to see the United States begin to move in a really different way in just a couple of years here as it comes to the progressed crescent phase. But right now in the new moon time, it is still very much so throwing up ideas and trying to grasp fog.
In around the middle of 2027, the US progressed moon will reach around 45 degrees ahead of the sun and enter its crescent phase. At this time, it should start to become clearer where the country's heading and what it's becoming. So if you feel like you don't know what the US is or where it's going right now, well, you're right where you're supposed to be.
I tend to find that the next phase, because it's the moon. The moon has wide, wiggly fingers, right? So we start to feel that next phase coming in just a little before it actually is the date that it hits or something like that. So as we're traveling through 26, things will get, a little bit clearer. But certainly as we hit the beginning of 2027 and then we move to 2028, this is where I think we have a much better idea internally of this nation, what it's going to be.
But things get really interesting when we look back into recent US history in light of the progressed lunation cycle. In early 2017, the progressed moon of the US arrived at its last quarter moon phase. This was the beginning of the winter phase of the US's progressed lunation cycle. In the last quarter moon phase of life, we start to turn away from obsolete forms that have served their purpose. We experience what Dane Rudyard called a crisis in consciousness.
Here, where we're considering the balsamic phase, I also consider the last quarter phase because I consider the last quarter and the balsamic phase winter and then balsamic deep winter. Okay, so if we were to even back up just a couple more years and get into the space of about 2018, this is where the US actually started to enter real winter. Like we were aware that, some things are starting to change. Some things are starting to get different. There's a slowdown, there's a pivot, but you can't quite tell exactly what it is, but a little vibe of resistance and something really different is in the air. And it causes a pause, although most of the time people and nations don't respond to the pause accordingly because it's like, no, I couldn't possibly be dying. No, I couldn't possibly need to slow down that much, right? So at this time, we would have seen, without even knowing what events were going on, we would have known that some things were starting to get off the table. They were starting to switch. Resistance was actually building at this time to change, to a dying off of what this nation used to be.
It's obviously very interesting to note that this was when Donald Trump was first elected president, signifying a hugely significant shift in America and a lot of soul searching for some. I think in part, Trump's election was a clear signal of dissent from a large segment of citizens about the direction the country was heading in. And interestingly, we can look further back in time to understand where that sentiment came from, because this cycle began with its progressed new moon phase in late 1994, early in the administration of Bill Clinton. This period had followed the winter phase of the previous cycle that had seen the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So this was when a new America was defining itself in a unipolar world without challenge from another superpower. One of the major acts of the Clinton administration was the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, between Canada, the US, and Mexico, which came into force in 1994, just before the beginning of that new moon phase. NAFTA was really the first modern free trade agreement in the world because it really represented a new phase of globalization. It showed that supply chains could be globalized. It shifted globalization from pure trade to the integration of production across different nations.
Thinking about from the lens of them having a full moon natal, I think that it also first of all, made things very illuminated, very, very visible, right? It's like that is when the US again was also using that natal energy to come into view, both its strengths and leadership, military effectiveness. All of these things start to come up. And so as we were traveling through that phase, you see the opposition that was also available there. And I just remember one of my school teachers saying, because I study languages, she said, "You're going to grow up and work for NAFTA." And I was like, "No, I'm not." Right. And I didn't or haven't. Right. But realizing that this is something that came into effect. This changed the trade era. This changed the way the US was moving at that time.
And again, the cycle reached its last quarter phase in early 2017 when Trump took over as president for the first time. One of the things he campaigned and rallied his base on was criticism of globalization and complaints that it had led to the loss of American jobs and the hollowing out of certain parts of the country, which had lost out to cheaper industrial production in places like Mexico as a result of NAFTA.
So then as we come forward and we get into that space of 2020 and officially enter the balsamic time, what do we start to see? The balsamic time brings the deep winter. We are going to slow down, go into our cave, and we need to be moving very, very, very slowly. Things get still. We're going to encounter real concepts of death, destruction, release, isolation. What's the biggest thing we did during the balsamic phase? COVID. And what did we do? We did all of those things, did we not? I mean, like bang on. But more significantly than just the events, and I don't mean to diminish any of the events, this was a big deal. What was happening for this entity is that it was coming into its last breath as that identity. And it really becomes even more confusing, I think, because in the balsamic time, it's like the old version of you is here and you know it. You've had years built off of this energy, but you're trying things an old way and they're not working. They're actually causing more problems. But you don't really know this new moon version yet. So it's like even with a country, they live in the middle and it can feel like, look like insanity. Because I don't really know who I am and what I'm doing yet. I'm just shedding.
So I think you might be able to see the power of this technique. I think the Secondary Progressed Lunation Cycle is very useful in client consultations, but until now I hadn't really looked at using it this way in mundane astrology. I'm definitely going to be studying it with more mundane charts and bringing it into forecasts. Thank you so much to Stormy for joining me in this video. If you want to learn more about how to use lunations in astrology, then she has got you covered.
So you can definitely find me all the time on YouTube. I'm over at the Stormy Grace Astrology channel. You can find me at stormygrace.com as well, where you can definitely drop into some pre-recorded lunation classes that I have for sure. There will be some live webinars coming up through 2026 talking about this as well. And I would love to have every single one of you in GAFA if this is something that you are ready for, or you want to be able to take these placements and these phases and put them in actual functional language. I would love to see you there.
In the bonus section of the video available for members of World Astrology Report, whether on YouTube or on my website, we're going to apply this same technique to the chart of Ukraine because it's showing us something very interesting about where Ukraine is now and where it's about to go.